the Sacred Vow podcast. My name is David A. Charles, and we have the beautiful
Amy Lee Mutton.
And this is a podcast created to help you create healthy, passionate, and secure relationships in the modern world. So we are on episode 4 right now, and we're running through a 3-part series of our love story. And so we're going to be diving into part 3 now. So with particularly the last part, we've kind of taken you on a journey going down into the depths. And this next part is really about almost like the coming home story, the stepping into really what the opportunities were and stepping into a place of willingness of being able to act on those. And this third part is really the transformation phase. So we're super excited to share this with you and share that coming home story. Yeah. Awesome, my love. So how about we jump in? So we left the listeners or the watchers at that point where we were moving to Queensland, and we're just discussing just prior to jumping on this recording what that process really was for us and what that really meant, and that it was like a looking for change, a seeking of change.
Yeah. I just remember that you were really unhappy in Adelaide, amongst other things, but that environment was definitely playing a part. And I can just remember this feeling like I didn't want to leave Adelaide. You know, not only my family and friends there, but also my business and the business that I'd been building over the past 3 years. All of my clients and connections were all in Adelaide. So it literally felt like a death to me, and like a huge risk selling everything, like literally uprooting everything that I thought was my safety. And I just remember this feeling of, I have to do this to save the relationship. Like if the relationship has any chance, I have to do this. We have to do this. We have to leave. And I can see now in reflection ways in which there was this external outsourcing to that experience of moving that was like a savior energy, that changing the environment would change our experience. And while I think that there is merit in that, I think that there is a truth in that, that obviously environment is really important. And but also that it wasn't the deeper truth of what was really going on for us. And also, like, I really feel like it played its part in the eventual discovery of what the truth of what was going on was, because without exhausting all options and avenues, would we have ever arrived where we arrived to? I don't personally think so. I feel like for me personally, I needed that complete stripping bare, because by the time we got to the turnaround point, I had felt like I had nothing left. I literally was just like, there is nothing left for me to cling on to. There is no identity. There are no material possessions. Like I had what we were living, what we could carry around in a car. And so for me, I think it was a really important part of my transformation, but it was brutal. And what I know now in reflection and what I love sharing with clients and with community is that it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be we were in a unique situation where we didn't have debt and children and, all those types of things. And so we experienced something unique in that complete throwing away of everything and moving around. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I think one important thing that I just want to point to is that I'm really passionate about people following like in human design terms, following their strategy. And that we don't necessarily know where something is going to take us. And we can look back and see with an overarching perspective of, there's an aspect that we were kind of running away from what was internally happening. But we never would have gotten to this realization if we hadn't have followed what was true and in that moment. So you like the journey, we can think of the journey as like being a straight line, but it's really not. And I know we hear that in lots of different aspects, but I think that's a perfect example. We can look back at that move to Queensland now and go, oh yeah, there's definitely an aspect of running away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really did just, I don't know whether turning the volume up is the right, because there certainly were shifts that we had. It feels like the volume was up in the time in Adelaide, and then that period in Queensland, there were just some other factors that kind of wiped out our excuses. COVID quite quickly. Once we landed up there, I was sick for, what was it? It was was I in bed for about 4 weeks or something?
Yes, but that wasn't just COVID though.
No, yeah, my knee blew up, and yeah.
Which side was it again?
Can't remember. I think
Your right knee.
It was my right knee.
Yeah. Dave just had this infection in his right knee that we still don't know where it came from and how it happened. And yeah, he was bedridden for weeks straight after having a really intense bout of COVID. And yeah, we were at house sit, and we had a house sit cancel and had to find another one. And I remember this feeling of like I did the thing, I left my home, I left my family, I left my community, I came to Queensland, and it's still like this, like what gives? Yeah. And shall I fast forward to when we were in the Gold Coast house?
Yeah.
So we were at this beautiful house there. I mean, we were staying in these magnificent, glorious properties, like on the outside, textbook version of it, it just looked like this beautiful gypsy lifestyle, staying in these ridiculously gorgeous places, exploring different local farmers markets every weekend. And it was glorious on paper. But yeah, it somehow did turn the volume up. And I think for me, it was just, I've given all of this, I've sacrificed all of this, and still nothing has changed. That was the story that was running for me. And we were house sitting this amazing place down in the Gold Coast, and Dave had friends on the Gold Coast. You were seeing your friends there, which had been a really big thing for you in Adelaide, not having connections with your good friends. And I remember reading I did read The Alchemist there, but I also read The Surrender Experiment. Experience. And it really profoundly touched me. And I remember seeding a prayer of just like, I'm ready to surrender. I'm ready to surrender what's being asked of me and whatever presents to me. And that sounds like a really peaceful prayer, but it was in amongst like some pretty wild and gnarly experiences that Dave and I were having. And it was like, we've talked to you guys about how strong our love is, and I know that you can see it in us now and see our commitment to each other, and it's in a much healthier expression now. It's in a beautiful expression now, but that has always been there. So we've had this wildly big love. So we would go from extreme highs to extreme lows very, very quickly. And that is very, very destabilizing for anyone's nervous system. And I think it's a lot of why people swing in different attachment style patterns and swing between codependence and independence so much, and really struggle to regulate themselves into interdependence. So I was reading this surrender experiment, and I was like, I'm ready to actually surrender. Anyway, we were having this really large argument, and I went upstairs to where Dave was sitting. And before I went upstairs, I really connected to that prayer of like, I will surrender to whatever he says. And I just remember getting to the top of the stairs, and I knelt down in front of Dave. He was sitting in an office chair. And I don't even remember if I said anything, but Dave said to me, it's time. I feel really emotional reflecting on it. Was so big. He just said, it's time. It's time for us to call this. and you were really calm about it. And I literally had just seeded that prayer. And for those of you that know me know that I take that very seriously. And, you know, when you pray, your job then is to look for where life is answering that prayer for you. And so I didn't resist. I said, okay. I surrendered to it. And it was, that day was gut-wrenching for both of us. What made it really beautiful for me, though, was being in the surrender of it, as gut-wrenching as it was. It meant that we actually, so basically what I'm saying is we broke up that day. So that wasn't clear. What was beautiful, that in my surrender we were able to experience a depth of love between us, even though we continued with that breakup. We weren't fighting and screaming at each other that day. We were crying, both crying and holding each other and just like being like, it doesn't have to be this. Well, no, I think I was saying it doesn't have to be this way. And Dave, bless him and thank him, was really holding his ground on like, yes, it does. Like, we need to break the cycle. And I think earlier in the day, Dave was very much of the perspective of like, this is permanent. Yeah. This is a permanent ending. And me, the eternal lover, was just like, I will surrender to this, but I will not close off to a future potentiality. Like I refuse to completely close the door on this. And I think because of the way that I was able to meet Dave in love, he, by the end of the day, was also just open to that it didn't have to be permanent. Is there anything of your experience of that you'd like to share?
It's just very similar in terms of the surrender. There was this feeling of like, I've done everything that I can do and we're still playing the same pattern. And I mean, there was part of me that did have hope that things would change, but I also had this feeling inside of myself that I needed to just be so solid on this and unwavering, and that would create, because if I, like in that moment, I felt that if I wavered, and looking back, if I did waver, we wouldn't have had the outcome that's happened.
No.
Yeah, there was such a surrender in me, and there was a letting go of the fight, and just looking forward from that point. That was really the moment from then on where, if we had challenges, that I didn't fight. I wasn't as defensive. Not saying that doesn't pop up from time to time, and didn't after that point, but that I really see that as kind of being like the start of the change. I was so deeply connected to my heart. I wasn't particularly open to you, but I was connected to my heart and what felt like the most loving thing to do for myself and for you. And yeah, that was really sort of like the beginning of the beginning of that shift, that moment where it's like I surrendered the fight. Yeah. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to win. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny how our experiences can be so different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was so strong to feel your love in that moment and your like hopefulness. It was really fucking challenging. It was really challenging for me.
Sorry. Aren't you glad though that I didn't just accept it completely?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I love so much about you, how much you love.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be together if it wasn't for your love on so many levels.
Yeah.
Like your like intensity of loving. Yeah. With an open heart, even when it hurts.
Yeah. So obviously we got back together. I think
Slowly.
We didn't speak for a week or so, and then I think we saw each other about 10 days or something later, and then I'd organised some different house sits. You went to a house sit that we'd already prearranged, and we saw a bit of each other. But I don't think that we came back into, I think it was probably at least a month, because I came for a trip to Adelaide, and yeah, we probably had about a month, I reckon, between being together full time again.
Yeah.
And I just remember this feeling of walking on such eggshells. I think we both were. And I think we were both totally not able to be in our naturalness, which is not ideal for anybody. And it's certainly not how we desire to live. We're both very, very passionate about being rested and being natural and not having to watch ourselves and moderate ourselves. And so that was really challenging. And we kept having little things. They obviously weren't as big. One really big thing that did happen for me was the anniversary of our engagement cropped up in that weird, awkward little phase. And we didn't have, when we got engaged, we didn't do the whole engagement ring thing, which was fine. Like I was totally happy with that. But then a year later, like when all of this was happening, like I realized that that was important to me. And so we did have a little re-engaging thing, and we got a ring, and that was really special for me to feel your commitment to me. But alas, all of this was still not enough for me to really come to a landed place so that our relationship could thrive and flourish. And what I eventually came to realize was I just had so much fear. It didn't matter what Dave did. It didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter what I was aware of in myself. It didn't matter what I accepted in myself. It didn't matter what I proclaimed responsibility for in myself. There was so much fear trapped in my nervous system and in my energy body and in my emotions that I could not regulate myself at all, which meant that I couldn't hear Dave. I couldn't hear him really ever. I couldn't hear him when he was talking about our relationship because I would instantly go into a defense mode. I couldn't hear him when he was talking about himself and trying to share something important to him about himself that maybe had nothing to do with the relationship, but because I was so scared, instantly and always thought something bad is coming. Something bad is coming. Like I'm going to lose something. I'm going to lose something that I want, that I desire, that I need. Something is being taken away from me. And yeah, what do you want to share of your experience of that, my love?
Yeah, it was really challenging because it felt like no matter what I did, there was a response or a reaction. And I'm not saying that I was perfect in that. I think that the challenges that we experienced through that time really got me to level up in communicating with an open heart. And yeah, it was certainly really challenging. It was really challenging for both of us. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like ultimately I was looking for some type of security. And so many women can relate to this, where they're looking for that security and commitment. And there's so much content and so much talk about like a man should commit to a woman. And yes, he should. And also he is entitled to be discerning with what he is committing to. It is not just commitment for commitment's sake or commitment in the face of emotional volatility or even emotional violence. Like I will put my hand up and say that there were times where I was emotionally violent, and I know that I'm not, like I know that people experience that in even bigger surges than what I did without a willingness to be self-aware or self-responsible at all. So like yes to men committing to women, and absolutely it provides so much safety to a woman and so much security for her nervous system to rest and her softness to open. But he absolutely is entitled to be discerning with who he gives that commitment to. In fact, he must. And because if Dave had given me an absolute commitment while I was still in those cycles of fear, I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you now. I wouldn't have the depth of awareness that I have. I wouldn't be rested in my life the way that I am. So without Dave's integrity on what he was willing to commit to, none of this would be possible.
Mm. And I feel like the vision that I held really from the start of our relationship, and that I touched on in the first part, the vision really didn't change too much, but I feel what did change was the way in which I communicated it. That changed dramatically. It was night and day, because I was still communicating very similar things of like, I want us to be able to talk about. I was actually laughing about it in reflection yesterday, that like I was asking for us to be able to speak freely on everything that came up without reaction. Yet I was being highly reactive.
It was very confusing.
it's it's like, we must be able to speak calmly, and it's just, it's hilarious. It's hilarious thinking back on it, and yeah, it's also really beautiful to see that that change
Yeah.
and that transformation. And yeah, there is certainly a dichotomy of that it takes one person to break the cycle, and also there's two people in the relationship, and there is like, with the interdependence, it's like each person affects the other person. Like there is a merging there. We're not completely independent where there's no impact that the other person has. And yeah, I can definitely see ways in which, because I feel like in this moment you're taking full responsibility for your part, which is amazing. And also there were many ways in which that I wasn't creating that space for you to be able to do that either. There were still ways in which I would get frustrated with you if you had a response that wasn't calm or collected or what I desired in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard the interdependence piece described as, with the independence that, you're solely responsible for you, I'm solely responsible for me, and that there's no crossover. And with the interdependence, that of course you're responsible for you, of course I'm responsible for me, but we're also responsible for each other's nervous systems. And for me, that translates to how I'm being and who I am being is directly going to impact your nervous system, and vice versa. And it is my role and responsibility and duty as your partner, as your wife, to be that I'm very conscious of who I'm bringing to the relationship. And that, of course, that deeply impacts you. And then that's also what I get to receive from you, is a conscious version of you that is conscious of who you're bringing to the relationship.
Absolutely. Like independence is about the one.
Yeah.
Then whenever there's a relationship, there's actually three. That's where like the whole idea of the Trinity comes in. So there's me, there's you, and then there's us as a unit. And we need to be responsible for all of that. It's not just, am I being fully responsible for myself? There's also like, responsibility for you as well.
Yeah.
And that I have on you.
Yeah. And you can't be, it's very clear to see, and I'm just going to speak to it explicitly, that you cannot be in the interdependent dynamic whilst you are incapable of being responsible for your own nervous system. So we're not saying that interdependence this isn't about better than or worse than. It's like better than independence. It's a step. It's a furthering of your ability to relate and to connect. And the independence phase is so, so important. You have to go through that phase to learn how to regulate your own nervous system and be with yourself, for yourself, by yourself, love yourself, accept yourself, meet yourself, to ever be able to do that in an interdependent dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just actually seeing, like, one of the things that I feel like I was being initiated into was this role of sort of like the father. And like a healthy father, he doesn't just say, I'm responsible for myself. He also says, I'm responsible for my family. And I'm responsible for each person within the family as well.
Yeah. So continuing in the little story narrative, we're back together. We were still having some challenges, but things were different.
Yes.
Things were definitely different between us. I definitely was shortening the time that it was from reaction to then opening my heart and being like, okay, fuck, I shouldn't have done that. I can see how I could have done that differently. This is actually, you know, now that I've had time to process it and think about it, this is actually how I would have liked to have been in that. So it started to, I feel like, build this picture with you where you were like, okay, Amy can actually see what I'm asking for. And then we had a couple of interesting experiences with some house sits that I know weren't super pleasant for you, and you were feeling quite, what would you describe your relationship to house sitting like? How did you feel about house sitting?
Resentful and pissed off.
You were what, sorry?
Resentful and pissed off.
Resentful.
Like these people's houses and they're being like we were looking after them so well, and then like one house was like, they didn't upkeep the garden. You never asked us to upkeep the garden. You have gardeners that come, and like that wasn't one of the roles. We looked after our roles perfectly.
Yeah.
There was just, she obviously just wasn't okay. Yeah.
So I feel like, you know, your nervous system wasn't going so well with gypsy life. We were having challenges already. Well, we were having less challenges, but we still weren't rested. And then we had these couple of experiences with house sits, one in particular where we just dealt with a crazy person, and that kind of tipped you past your limit.
It definitely tipped me past, because it was also a lot to be moving every 4 weeks. It was also a lot, just the instability of it, and kind of like, it was challenging. I really realized how important stability is for me in an environment. Although it was beautiful and we got to see so many different places, that was challenging, and not having our own sort of spaces to land in. And it just kind of reached breaking point with that last woman.
Yeah. And so then what happened? What happened, and why are we sitting here on Zoom?
Well, I made the decision that what was best was for me to come back to Melbourne. I made the decision that was what was going to be best for me and for us as well. Like, in terms of, I wasn't showing up as the man that I wanted to be, and I didn't have the stability that I wanted or needed to, like, around work, like moving around a lot. I work online on computers and stuff, obviously, and it was just very destabilizing for my work. And there was just an acknowledgement of, like, if I want to step into the man and the father and the provider of the family, then I need to make a change, and I need to make a hard decision, and one that's going to be really challenging, and may also, like, break seems like a strong word, but in some way break us as well, because I knew that I needed just to come back and focus on my work and just really drop into that. The past couple of years before that were just very destabilized around work, with the challenges that you and I were having. And then moving on to Queensland as well. Big time.
It was a big time. So Dave decided that he was going to head back to Melbourne, pack up all of his stuff in Queensland, the stuff we were carting around, the stuff that we had in storage up there, and head back to Melbourne. And this really became my personal make or break moment. You know, in the same way that we'd experienced the depth of my love in our previous challenges, thankfully, it came through for me again. I knew that I had, you know, very similarly too, if you can remember in part 1 of this story where I shared that time before Dave and I had even met in person, and he said, I don't think this is a long-term thing, and how I, in that moment, had this very powerful transformation experience of really holding myself and holding what was true for me. This was similar on a much more exaggerated scale of just like this is one of those moments that life offers to you and asks you, Amy, who do you want to be in response to this? And what is going to walk you towards the destiny that you desire? And choose that. Like, if that's what you want, you have to choose actions right now and responses right now that are going to give you a possibility of receiving that desired outcome.
Yes.
And so it sent me very deeply into myself. Obviously, I was also very much holding the tension of huge fear. Like, this stimulated everything. This stimulated every shame, every guilt, every abandonment fear. There had been a part of me, an intuitive knowing for a long time. I would just hear this little voice occasionally that said, you're going to have to let him go. And so I'd known for months. And also, like, I'd gotten to the point in the relationship just before Dave decided that he was going to go back to Melbourne, where I was actually considering breaking up with him. That's how bad, like, that's how much we just couldn't keep staying in the cycle that we were in. I was getting to the point where I was like, I don't think I can do this. Like, I think I'm gaslighting myself to stay now. So I was receptive. As much as I was fear-filled about this, I was also receptive to the experience, because I very much knew that we could not continue, and that what we were doing was not ultimately conducive to the life that I desired or that we desired. So I remember this really pivotal moment for me, one of those moments that didn't seem like anything special but left a really big imprint. And it was just before Dave drove away and started his trip back. And we were sitting in a park, and I was crying, and I said, I was justifying myself and defending myself. And I said something like, yeah, but this is the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And Dave just looked at me and said, Amy, how long are you going to keep telling yourself that story? And I don't think either of us meant for it to be a life-changing moment, but it was. And like, it hit me like a Mack truck. It definitely shut me up. And then it just really stayed with me. And I was like, that's when I think I really started to realize that God was speaking to me through Dave. And that I needed to listen to this man. I needed to listen to his words and to his actions and to his way that he was moving through life and what he was inviting us into. And about a week later, so I just kept going with the house sits that we had in Queensland. And I can feel ways that I still was like, no, stay, do these house sits, it'll be different. Like, that I was still looking for the experience to be the thing, that I was like, no, it'll be different at the next house sit. They're great people. We've met them. It'll be fine. Anyway, the house sits turned out to be these perfect sanctuaries for me to just be. It was awesome. But yeah, about a week later, I had a session with a very, very good friend and mentor of ours, Andrew Pierce. And Andrew really cracked me open to how to navigate fear. It was literally like, I feel so emotional thinking about this one session. It was literally like I'd been handed the keys to the Golden City in 60 minutes. And I finally understood and was able to be present to the fear that had been running me. And what that then also cracked me open to was God, was true faith, was a true connection to that which holds me, that holds us infinitely and innately all of the time. And I went on this journey of, I suppose it was a reclaiming of my relationship to myself. It was it was actually the embodied and integrated experience that the masses are chasing of self-love and self-connection and self-knowing and honoring and valuing, but in a true sense, not because I was, doing certain practices every day or, it wasn't your typical self-love experience. I was going through absolute hell. I felt like I was walking through hell every day, and I learned how to meet myself in that and love myself through that and understand that I was okay without Dave. And I've described it to some people, and I've worked with clients on this exact same thing since. A lot of people, I'll speak for women, a lot of women experience this ultimate fear of being alone. And ultimately, that's what I was trying to protect myself from. All of those fears that I had coming up was this fear of being alone. And I felt like that in accepting the fear of being alone and the reality of potentiality of being alone, that I was saying to the universe, I'm happy to be alone. And so I'd resisted going through that portal because I didn't want to signal to the universe, I'm happy to be alone. And it was paradoxical. I still can't, it's kind of beyond words. And as it really is, going through fear portals and letting go of them, because what I knew what I wanted in my life was on the other side of accepting the potentiality of being alone. That to not be alone, I had to accept being alone. And I feel like, I know this is when stuff really started to change for us, because I was able to interact with you differently. I was able to communicate with you differently. I was able to hear you without losing my shit. I was able to advocate for myself when it was valid for me to, go, hang on a second, that's actually not how I'm being or what's happening. And so I finally, after 2 years, was able to not react, to leave space for you to have an experience of yourself in the relationship as well. Would you like to share your experience of that before I keep going?
It allowed me to both have space for myself and what I was bringing, but it also enabled me to be able to, created the space for me to lead as well. And for there just to be, a deeper surrender to my leadership and my direction. And certainly it allowed us to navigate challenges more easily, because prior to that, when there was a greater fear running about being alone, one of the concerns that I had when we had challenges was that I felt as if you would just say whatever you thought that I wanted to hear, and then that might manifest as like saying, yes, I'm going to make these changes, or you denying what was true and real for you, and then there being potentially a build-up of energy and frustration from you around like these needs that you had that I didn't even know, that I was trying to call forward, but I didn't even know could exist, and how could I? So there was just such a massive shift there in that transformation.
And I was being really genuine all of the times that I expressed what I thought was willingness to change, and able to see to a degree what you were saying. But I without that ability to really meet myself in the truth of my fears, it was impossible.
Yes.
It was impossible. Another really beautiful thing started to happen in this time, and it is still something that we practice today and that I speak to a lot of people about, and it extends beyond our relationship with one another. I really use this in life, and that is the piece about relating to each other's highest selves. I feel like that only really started through this time, and I feel like I'm recalling bringing that into our space because my relationship with myself had finally clicked into place, and I was able to advocate for myself, and I was able to see my own greatness, beauty, brilliance, love, what I brought to the relationship. Because when you start to accept the lower frequencies of your expression, then you can also start to accept the higher frequencies of your expression and own how frigging magnificent you are. But until you accept the lower frequencies, you are not in acceptance of the higher frequencies, even if you say you are, even if you talk about, oh, I'm great and I'm really good at this and da, 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 da. They are, you have to do them both at the same time. And so because I knew it would have been more obvious to me than to Dave the radical changes that were going on inside of me. Because I knew in my internal state what was happening for me. I knew that the reactivity was decreasing and decompressing rapidly. And I also knew that Dave was completely valid and justified in being wary of trusting that. Absolutely. Not just based on the time we'd spent in our relationship, but his past relationships, his other experiences with women in his life. He was totally valid in having trouble trusting that. And so instead of fighting him on that, and instead of being like angry, like, why don't you trust me? I invited him into trusting me, because I think that that's really important. We can't fight someone, and particularly as women, we can't fight men into relating with us or trusting us or anything like that. You can't fight a man into who you want him to be and how you want to experience your connection with him, because that's you being really penetrative, and a masculine man will never, ever, ever respond to that. You only can, if you're talking about relating with a masculine man or desiring your man to be in a more embodied masculine state, you must be in a receptive state. If you are being penetrative to him, you're either going to flip the polarity dynamic or encourage him to stay where he is, not in a strong masculine frame. I can see Dave nodding, so I'm obviously nailing that from the masculinist perspective.
Well, one of the things that's most inviting for me, and also creates the way, invites me to relate in a way that you want me to as well, is through your softness, like is through your receptiveness, through your having an open heart. And I know a lot of these words are thrown about in like polarity teachings and all that kind of stuff, but really it's just like the connection to the heart. You being connected to your heart just melts me. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, I think today's men can have a challenge between like the melting and still being like strong, connected to themselves, in their power, where they're not just descending into like a pile of mush or like a puddle. But it really melts me. It really melts me. And that's been a big change in the way that we communicate, is if you feel that I am being hard or rigid or forceful or closed off in my heart, you're quickening into softness and also inviting me into that space. It just changes. My tone changes in an instant.
Yeah.
And vice versa as well. Like I think that's been one of the big shifts. Like from that stepping into the willingness of that, like true willingness to step into the vulnerability of that space has really created that change, and being a stand for that. And I think that's also linked to the speaking to our higher selves, because our higher selves, we are like, we're connected to all of us.
Yeah.
Like our higher selves do walk with heart connection.
Yeah. I want to speak a little more. I segued away from that highest self piece. So I do a lot of highest self work with a lot of people. And again, that's a term that you hear trotted out in all sorts of different places. And it can, it can be wishy-washy. But the way that I work with the energy of that presence is that it is the highest version of you, like your highest potentiality that you came here to embody. I'm hearing like full Mission Impossible, should you choose to accept.
That's great.
But there's always more. Like when you think you've got there, you've like achieved something, like there's always more. Your higher self will continue to keep revealing greatness to you. It is fully limitless potentiality. And something that I was experiencing as I was going through these rapid changes was I could feel Dave relating to my old way of being. And I understood that, and I was able to love that part of him, right? Because that's his fear. Yeah. His fear was that I wasn't going to change. And so I had enough awareness and love to be able to like hold that and know that, okay, that's his fear. If I'm going to be with my fear, I have to also be able to be present to his fear and be like, okay, he's scared that I'm not going to change. So he is relating to this old way of being. And so I invited us into this way of relating where it's like, not to be ignorant of the potentiality of regressing or not actually embodying this change, but I need you. I remember explicitly saying, like, I have a need, and this need is that you program me to become my highest self. That is that you're advocating for my highest self. You're advocating for me to continue to embody that. And yes, to having an awareness of shadow behaviors, but that plays a far lower percent than advocating for each other's highest self. Because in me asking for that, it is imperative that I'm also giving that. You can't just ask for that yourself and then be only looking at the other person as who they've been in the past, or if they're having a moment where they are repeating a behavior where you're like, see, fucking told you, I knew that you were going to stay like that. It's only fear talking. But an open heart, as Richard Rudd says, open hearts can never be overwhelmed. And so you have to get able to keep your heart open in the face of challenge, because that is how we actually invite each other to become our highest selves. It's not just about us as an individual being our highest self. It has to be about everybody becoming their highest self. And that has been a real glue for us.
It has. And there has been quite a few times, many times, where you have said to me, are you relating to me as I was? Or are you relating to me as I am now? And that was really great, because it's so easy to have our eyes colored with past experiences, both in terms of like our relationship, but also like my past experiences. As I mentioned in either part 1 or part 2, my past experiences have been that. It's like I've basically just been given lip service, and that there hasn't been change.
Yeah.
And that has been mixed with sort of gaslighting is a very strong term, but just kind of like gaslighting behavior of minimizing and distorting, or just flat out denying. And so, yeah, that was one belief and pattern, one of my biggest ones that I really had to encounter and meet and release.
Yeah. I think what it gives as well when you relate to someone like that, it gives them belief. Like, as you were able to start relating to me in that way, I wasn't having to prove you wrong. I was proving you right.
Yes.
You were believing in this higher version of me, which lit me up and filled my heart with just like, I get to prove him right. I get to like, he believes in me, he trusts me and believes in me. And it's like a kid, right? Are you going to say to a kid, oh, you're shit at spelling, or your writing is messy, it's going to be like that forever? Are you going to be like, no, mate, you're going to get better? Like, it's fucking obvious. Why then, when we're in relationship with people, and then like my invitation is to give yourself a break, because it's just your fear. If you're listening to this being like, oh my God, I do that, I want you to just even put your hands on your heart and just allow yourself some grace that it's your fear, and actually welcome your fears to come into your awareness, because you're not doing it because you're a bad person. You're doing it because you're a scared person, and that's okay.
And for the listeners, how many times have you related with someone and you've had this feeling of this person doesn't see me clearly, and this person doesn't understand me, or that you've felt or observed just almost like a twisted way, like a twisted perspective that's being placed on you. And one of the ways that we can clean up our relationship is seeking to dismantle the expectations and the boxes that we put other people in. Because that's also, I feel like, what so many people are asking for. Don't put me into this box. You don't know me. You don't fully know me. And we're all dynamic. We all have different aspects of self. And part of this conversation I see is just being like looking at the world through clearer and clearer lenses and clearer glasses. Like, one of the things that Amy and I speak about is actually this idea that we're here to walk each other through the gates of heaven. And that's actually what we see the role of relationships being. And like for our case specifically, like we see that our relationship as that's the role of our role of relationships in general, but also more specifically our relationship. And what a beautiful container to walk in that. And part of that is allowing people to show up differently, allowing people to break your models of who and what they think they are. And I think we're all asking for that in some way. There comes an acceptance, there comes surrender, there comes owning our own perspectives and glasses and beliefs and patterns that we have.
Yeah. And I feel like, an individual's ability to allow that process is all underpinned by their relationship to themselves. Until you are secure in yourself to a degree, and your security will continue to deepen, but until you hit this tipping point or this invisible non-specific marker of the depth and security of your relationship to yourself, you won't be able to do that. And so what is most important for you is for you to come to know yourself deeply, and for you to be willing for that journey. Like, that's going to continue evolving for your entire life, but it's about your willingness to know yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a point that I had just then.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, it's gone. It's gone for this moment. That's all
right. So obviously then in Dave's leaving, that kickstarted a long distance relating experience for us. And long distance is not something that I ever would have put my hand up for, because I was fearful. I've had a couple of people ask me, like, are you worried he's going to cheat on you? And it's like, no, I'm not. Like, I never have been worried that you would cheat on me. However, when I did that session with AP, that was one of the fears that my mouth spoke, even though I know that it's not true. So, I never would have advocated for this long distance experience. And it has been the thing that has transformed our entire way of relating. And again, that's not to say that people have to go long distance to heal their relationship. It's what life had planned for us, because it gave us, from my perspective, it gave us time and space. It gave us an opportunity to refine our independence and really completely finalize and put to bed our codependence, and to really choose who we were bringing into our interdependent relationship. It just gave a spaciousness in our communication, that we were able to then meet each other more deeply.
Yes, because looking back at our relationship as well, like we spent so much time together, and there's a beauty to that, and also in ways it was suffocating for both of us.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's part of the moving from codependence, independence, interdependence, is finding that balance of space. Now we're certainly we're not in the optimum level of.
I don't want this much space.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing that's been really beautiful as well is that when we're spending time together, that the changes have landed and are like they're landed.
They're landed. It's now our way of being. And I think in the beginning of the long distance, and maybe that first time we saw each other, it was still felt like a training ground. Yes. A little bit, but there's been a radical integration on both of our parts that it's landed, and I have no resistances, hesitations, fears about it anymore at all.
Yeah, and also in that first time, just as we were talking about, I was moving through my belief that things weren't going to change.
Yeah.
So that's
and I was like, but I'm magnificent. I've been doing all of this fear work for the last 2 months, and I know that everything has changed. Love me as I am.
Yes.
Oh, what a time. And we've got about 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks left of long distance.
Yes. Yeah, we do.
And around about our 2-year engagement anniversary, just after, we'll be coming back together.
Yes.
There'll be no more Zooming.
Yeah. I'm so looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. It's time. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome, my love. What else do you see? Anything else?
I feel like there might be another piece on the long distance that we haven't covered, of just how we've navigated that. You know, I think a lot of people have long distance experiences, or perhaps would lean away from them. I don't know if it's an episode on its own, but I think, you know, how we've navigated long distance just briefly could be resourceful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's certainly been a strong sense of devotion and connection through that. Like like we message every morning, we message last thing at night. And I see that as being really beautiful. Like, our connection is so important to us. I hear of different long distance, and I have done long distance before, and it was just such a remarkably different experience. Different experience to the way that I hear it described, where we're in this together. We're not living separate lives. We're in this together. We are fortunate that we're close to each other as well, so that we can spend time together through that. But I think we also have a larger perspective about what this time is for. And we've built it on a foundation of having spent a lot of time together. It's coming from a place of sometimes I hear and when I've done it before in the past, there was a sense of fear around doing long distance, like around this, like, I need to do this because, you know, otherwise I'll lose this opportunity of love. And it wasn't true. There wasn't a truth to it. But there's a knowing for us that we're here, we're in this love. We have been through challenges, and love is still there, and the love just keeps on getting stronger, and we keep on getting stronger. And from my perspective as well, I just have this beautiful feeling of we can go and move through anything. And we have moved through so many different experiences that would have broken us, and in a way, like, if it was anyone, it would have. Like, our love and our connection is so beautiful and so special. And
I feel like something that I've really been able to gift you through this long distance experience is that, you know, you can trust me. after such a long time in our relationship of me not being trustworthy, of my stability not being a trustworthy place for you, something that you've really received from me in this experience is a very connected, I trust Amy. I've really been able to show you the making of who I am through this. And I didn't have that before. This experience has birthed that version of me. And what I would say is that if there are any fears about long distance for you, there's codependent stuff playing out, because codependence is rooted in fear. And, you know, while I've had past experiences of some shorter term, long distance stuff in relationships. And even when it wasn't bad, like if things were good, the deep state of missing that person was intense, like consumingly intense, like looking at my phone all the time, like really seeking that connection and hearing from that person. And having our experience now, like I miss you an extreme amount, but it's a very rested state of missing. I've never had this experience in a past relationship of being able to miss someone so intensely, but be so rested in it and so casual with it. Yeah, and I just know in my past experiences of that really strong missing feeling, confusing that in the past with strong love, when really it was trauma bonding and codependence. So yeah, I'm going to trust that that's going to serve. And there might be something you want to add to that, or that might feel complete for you.
I think like I wouldn't call us advocates for long distance. I don't know, but more just like opening up. I think the important message from it is that this is a journey that we have been on. And yeah, just to, I see it as like being this thing of relationships. Relationships have a path forward, and just being, I think the less expectations and the less boxes that we can put in our life and the direction that it goes allows more life, energy, power, love to fill that space. And I'm a very firm believer in it doesn't matter what happens, it's how we show up to them. And that's been something that we've really walked with and walked through.
Yeah. That's like a totally different way of saying exactly what I was thinking, which is like trust what life brings you. Neither of us would have thought that this long distance would do what it's done for our relationship. And life has an infinite wisdom beyond anything that we could possibly imagine. And if you can learn to trust the experiences that life is bringing to you, and as Dave said, like who you are is measured in how you respond to these experiences that life brings you that are beyond your control and designed that way.
Yes, because what I've noticed is that my mind previously would have told a story about, oh, you're just running away though. Being in long, you're just running away. But what we have experienced is that there's been a deeper closeness and a way of being with one another when we're in a physical space. There's just so much more rested and and landed.
Yeah, I felt people's questioning of you in that too. You know, some people in my family and in my friends, like really questioning your motives and intentions, and that was a lot to hold while I was still working it out myself, where I was just like batting for you, but also internally that little voice of like, is that true? You know, even when we reset our wedding date, I had someone close to me say, oh, but do you think you've spent enough time together? And and you know, my invitation to you, world, is run your relationship on your own terms. Fuck off all societal norms and the voices of other people, and trust your heart and trust that entity that exists between you and your partner. Trust that third party, the entity of that, and break the fucking mold.
Yes, because we get into so much trouble with speaking to other people about our relationships. That's been one thing. Like, I really have never spoken to anyone else about our relationship, and I'm grateful for that, because it's rare to be able to get fresh, clean perspectives from people that aren't colored by their own biases and their own triggers, their own trauma, their own beliefs.
Yeah. Amazing.
So relationships are a crazy, chaotic, love-filled endeavor in both, like, in a shadow way and also in a like a very exalted way, where they're just they're a dance, and we just need to surrender to that dance and listen to what's true for us and what's true to the entity of the relationship as well. And in truth, we can gain fresh perspectives from people, and there can certainly be power in that. And also trust yourself, trust what's coming up.
Yeah. Amazing. So, guys, as always, we welcome your feedback, your comments, your questions, anything that you would like us to dive into. So now we've completed the story, we've completed the 3-part story, and we're going to be diving into topic-specific podcasts from here. So we've got a little list that we've been developing of different things we'd like to speak into, and we've had a couple of people already send through some awesome invitations to us to speak on particular topics. And just continuing to welcome those in from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, this has been the Sacred Vow podcast. Thanks for coming along on this journey. This has been a big one, and we've been super excited to record each one of these episodes, and we're just looking forward to diving into specific topics as well.
Thanks, guys. Bye.